everyone. Welcome to my video. That's actually just a slideshow I'm going to talk over. This is the intro, the part in which I just kind of screw around for a couple minutes before I actually get into the main subject of the quote-unquote video. I'm having a problem today in that everything smells like hamburgers. It's not even just regular hamburgers, but like picture really, really greasy hamburgers. It's making my skin feel disgusting and like I need to take another shower even though it's still morning. It's you would now, it might sound great to some people. I'm sure some people love hamburgers a lot more than I do, and I'm sure the idea of everything smelling like them would be a dream come true. But let me tell you, it is not. It is a total nightmare. Even my books smell like hamburgers, and it's just not great. It's horrible, actually. I don't know if it's the schizophrenia or if it is the epilepsy that's doing this. I usually I smell like smoke, or it can be like a fruity or like citrusy kind of smell. Today it's hamburgers, and I just really wish it would go away. I also had the choice of either doing this or of going to my family reunion. However, I imagine they will be serving lots and lots of hamburgers there. So that is my excuse for not going, that I don't want to smell more hamburgers. Although, frankly, I don't think I would have went regardless, because I never go to those things. And I'd much rather do this, because I'm super excited, even though I don't sound that way. I'm trying not to get too excited, because my various issues start to flare up. So now with that 2 minutes of preamble out of the way, let's actually talk about what we're here for. So I've prepared some various images from the 1973 version of the Crazies. We're mostly going to be talking about particular things that interest me, but we'll also relate this to schizophrenia and psychophobia closer to the end. I'm sure little tidbits will come up every now and then. While we're still on this gentleman, I guess we'll be coming back to this particular image later and actually discussing it. But while we're on this part of the video still, I want to talk a little bit about the title. I feel like people, when I bring up this movie or they know about it, they think I'm going to have a problem with it. But I actually don't mind the title too much. It, to me, sounds like something that would be said colloquially. Why is that word so hard? I imagine that if this were an actual disease outbreak that occurred, if the Trixie virus, which is the thing that makes everyone crazy in this film, if it were real, I could picture someone being like, "Oh, she's got a case of the crazies," or "Oh, you're coming down with that there crazy virus," or whatever. You know what I mean? It's just I can picture this actually being what people would kind of call it. I don't think people would tend to call it by its formal name. Plus, I mean, it's like, again, it's like a 50-year-old movie, so I don't think there's really a point getting hung up on the title. We've got bigger issues to worry about, and there's a lot of substance to this film. I don't think people need to really judge it by its title, although I think quite a few people, really, probably most people at this point, don't even know about this film. And definitely people my age and younger have no clue what this is. Or they may be more familiar with the remake. I think that was in 2010 or 2011. That was actually my introduction to this way back in the olden times. And I guess on the subject of titles, I'm calling this series Schizo Horror Analysis. I know some people don't like the term schizo, which I don't really care much either way. There's like some circumstances where I'm like, hey, you probably shouldn't use that. But for the most part, again, I think we have bigger things to concern ourselves with. And frankly, would you have wanted me to call this person with schizophrenia horror analysis? Like that doesn't really roll off the tongue too well, now does it? Okay, that's enough of the pretext preamble section that I do in a lot of these. Let's get right into it. Now, one thing I will say real quick though, since this movie is rather old at this point, expect that many of the images are going to be of kind of low quality. I did my best. Some of them, including this next one, are really bad, but you'll just have to kind of bear with me on this. Okay, let's dive into it before this video turns into like 2 hours in length. I do these off the dome, by the way, so you never know how it's going to turn out. So yeah, you can kind of see what I'm talking about in terms of the quality. But something I really like about this film is about midway through, in the middle sections of the film, there are these really, I guess, tranquil shots is what I would say. I love the imagery in the countryside juxtaposed with the violence and, I guess, horrors of war that we see in this film. It gets me thinking quite a bit about how, those, how a lot of films will have, I don't know, everything will be like gray and smoky or yellow or like really dark, like in war films or even apocalyptic films, stuff of that sort. I like that this shows more of how it would actually be. It's not like the earth just kind of changes because there's a conflict going on or there's some kind of disease outbreak. The world isn't just going to start looking more greenish or yellow. I mean, unless there's like, I don't know, some sort of like miasma in the air of disease, then in which case I suppose it might. But yeah, I like how ordinary and rather peaceful a lot of this movie looks, especially when it gets juxtaposed with much of the death we see. This virus, for those who aren't familiar, this isn't going to be like a super general analysis. You're just going to have to watch the film if you want to know more about some things, or watch other videos. But for those who have not seen it, the virus tends to make people very belligerent or hostile, violent. Not always, though. In fact, maybe even in the majority of cases, actually. It's kind of hard to tell, but for the most part, people will start to just act kind of bizarre or say rather strange things at first, and then it gets more and more erratic from there, I guess. But some of the people who are infected with this bioweapon never, it like crashed somewhere and got into the water supply, and it's been there for like 5 or 6 days by the time this film starts. Anyway, some people never turn violent. I don't know if that's just because they don't get to live long enough, or like we just don't follow those particular individuals enough to see them get that way. Like there's one member of the protagonist group that is trying to escape the quarantine named Kathy. She doesn't do a ton. She's not like a super active character, but she is a good example of someone who gets infected and starts to change rather early, and yet she never turns violent and is killed anyway by the military. So yeah, I don't know if it's never quite clear cut that they will inevitably become violent, which I like. I actually like that there's a lot of ambiguity in this film, which I appreciate. I like the way these fellows are dressed as well. Of all the colors they could have went with, they go with these white hazmat suits, and it's a very like striking shade of white. Is that a real thing, a shade of white? I'm not for sure, but let's just say it is. They stick out like sore thumbs, especially in these parts of the film. And you would think they would have went with like green or even maybe the classic like yellow, but which I think they do. They go with green in the remake, but I actually like I like the white because it's like a physical example of the Army's incompetence in this film, of which there is a lot pretty much from the get-go. And really there's, I guess, incompetence on all sides of this, within this story, but particularly it really stands out with the people that are supposed to be controlling the situation and keeping people safe, So, and I like the way too, and this might be even the main motivation behind the choice of outfit, but I like the way if they get injured, the blood is extra striking against the white, and it makes them look like ghosts that are wandering the countryside. I love that imagery, especially in shots where they take up a very small amount of the frame, so they kind of just look like these otherworldly like specters just sort of roaming or marching through the tranquil countryside. I also, and of course, the gas mask. I like that it obscures their faces. You never know if you're following, like if we're seeing soldiers that we've seen at other parts in the film, if these are different people, and they don't really know each other either, as I'll talk about more as we get farther into this. But yeah, certainly their choice of outfit makes them feel like an invading, occupying force, which was definitely the intent in this film. I I like that it greatly gives you the sense that they do not belong here. Hence why even when they are standing near something like say a white painted house, they still just again stand out like sore thumbs. They're this otherworldly, like, alien type force. Here I think is another good example of that actually. Speaking of Kathy, that would be her body laying there. But this is yeah, one of these moments that really stuck with me. I think in part because the sheep kind of run around during this entire scene, but this is one instance of the aforementioned psychophobia in which Kathy is unarmed, yet they all panic as she's getting near them, and one of them even says something along the lines of, she's insane, just shoot her. But then eventually they do it kind of firing squad style, where you know how during executions one person might have like the actual bullet and the other have blanks or what have you, and so that they don't know who actually delivered the killing shot. That sort of happens here, where they all just decide to start firing, and I guess um, firing rather wildly. And I guess that way the blame doesn't all fall on a particular one, which I like that even at this comes very late in the film, and I like that there's still those kind of humanizing moments where they're not like completely callous or completely willing to commit brutal acts, or the type of things we see in this film where they're looting corpses or hurting all of the people together regardless of whether they're infected or not, and sort of dooming the still healthy people or potentially still healthy people to a gruesome fate. I think the sheep are perhaps meant to. I've had a hard time wrapping my head around this particular scene, but I think maybe the sheep are indicative of the fact that the army is just as fearful as the townspeople in this film, which, again, this is pretty far into it. I think at this point they've realized their own vulnerability. At this point, as I'll discuss more, they've realized that the hazmat suits and gas masks they're wearing do not offer nearly as much protection as they thought, and other measures they have in place do not work effectively in keeping them safe from catching this illness. So even though before they were trying harder to like round people up, it's interesting to me that there is several of them and one unarmed, non-hostile woman who is approaching them, and they all kind of panic and just start shooting at her. It's still a gruesome, callous act, but I guess humanizing in the sense that they have come to understand their own vulnerability. And I mentioned psychophobia here because there's of course quite a bit of this in the film. I don't know if it's meant to be, if the virus is meant to parallel schizophrenia in particular, or if it is just they're all experiencing psychosis, or if they're delirious, or what have you. I don't think it's necessarily meant to parallel a like one particular illness. I think it's just sort of like a generalized craziness disorder or whatever. It completely fictitious, but I can certainly relate to it in some ways, and I can see parallels to the real world in that respect. I don't entirely blame these guys either for being fearful of this disease, even though they are here to combat it, to contain it, because it's, I guess, representative of a loss of self. These people either become entirely different, or certain parts of who they are become more blatant, like over the top, and they lose other parts, as we'll discuss with one of the characters named Clank. But then at the same time, I also am someone with schizophrenia. I mean, it's not usually quite this bad, but it does get me thinking of how what if it was contagious, how the world would react. I would imagine I would have probably been put down pretty quickly. Although I'm quite good at masking in the sense that people were surprised to learn that I have it, and it went unnoticed by people for several years. So I don't know. Maybe I'd be able to skirt by, but I assume if anyone had the knowledge of this diagnosis, they would hand that over, perhaps, and I would either be confined for the rest of my days or would be put down for the good of humanity, which is sort of the army's purpose in this, I suppose, in that they're really meant here they're really here to contain it, to prevent the rest of the nation from potentially getting infected. It doesn't work out so well as the disease does eventually escape, and it has, by the end, we learn that a new town has been infected. This here is one of the shots I was talking about before, where they make up a very small portion of the frame. Oh, I should have mentioned too, I had to, for the sake of making this, had to crop some of the shots out, and they tend to look a bit darker at the top for whatever reason as well. Not all of them, but just know that this isn't entirely representative of what it would really look like if you were watching the film on your own. I see at least 9 of these fellas here, possibly 10. I can't tell if 2 of them are kind of like blurring together, but it just goes to show how impractical they are. Impractically, they are outfitted for this whole operation, fighting a small-scale war, as one of the characters, Major Ryder, puts it. And again, I love these. I love this, how these shots make them simultaneously seem very threatening and yet incredibly weak as well. Again, the army makes a lot of mistakes in this film, and there are points where individual soldiers are absolutely terrified. There's even one part early on where someone who I guess must be like a raw recruit who has never seen combat starts freaking out at the fact that one of the townspeople is shooting at them, and he ends up getting shot in the back and killed. So they're simultaneously portrayed as weak and fearful, but then also incredibly dangerous, because you see throughout this what they are capable of, and there is a heck of a lot of them, a seemingly infinite number of them, even though it's also mentioned that they don't have nearly enough men to contain to like hold the perimeter and deal with all the people fighting back. This shot here in particular is what got me thinking of them as ghosts. I felt like I was watching one of Romero's zombie films for a moment here. I got him in kind of an awkward position, but this guy, one of the characters I mentioned before, Clank, shoots this guy several times, and he just oddly remains standing. He's kind of falling, but is still standing up for a weird amount of time for this film, because things tend to move rather quickly, even though I've heard some people say it's a slow film. I really don't know what they're talking about when they say that. There are also a lot of cuts. It was quite difficult to get the particular shots I wanted, because things get cut away from so quickly most of the time. But yeah, this particular image really stuck with me. We can see what I was talking about before with the blood really standing out on their outfits. But yeah, I have to, every time I watch this, I have to rewind a little bit and come back to this part, because I'm just wondering if, like, did that really just happen? I kind of have that experience. I need to go back through it. It really creeps me out the way he remains standing for just a strange amount of time. I love little things like that, things that stick with me in that way. This was another example I had of the juxtaposition of the violence with the tranquility. And man, this is another one that really stuck with me. The child standing next to his mother that was just killed by the army, and he's about to be whisked away into a van and carried off to the high school where they are containing everyone. And if he's not doomed already, this kid certainly is once he gets loaded into that van. But yeah, there's something about the beauty of nature juxtaposed with the violence and devastation we see in this film. It gets me thinking about how, I guess, what the world would be like, or even will be like, when there are no humans around anymore. It it also makes me think about how some of these characters that we follow, which I'll talk about more, are veterans. The protagonist David was actually a Green Beret, and I guess how the horrors of war and just terror have finally come home. It's interesting too how the American army feels again like an invading, occupying force to American citizens in this film, as well as how their rights are very quickly taken away. And it can certainly be justified under the situation. It's certainly a morally gray thing, but it does fascinate me how within, I think it's within like the first 10 minutes, people are already being corralled and having certain rights taken away. One of the local authority figures, the sheriff, is killed by the military. This is where we see they are looting the bodies of some of the townspeople before burning them. There's a kind of funny bit of foreshadowing that leads up to this that I'll discuss here in a second, but I wanted to show at least a couple of shots of the sort of things they do in this film. And mind you, they do get some more, they're not all just committing vile acts. They do have some real humanizing moments in which they, just aren't entirely villainous. Let me move to this one, and then I'll explain more what I mean. This is the part, I guess, the first instance we see of them taking people's stuff. This guy, I love this guy. He grabs one of the fishing rods and sort of looks around like he's a little kid that knows he's doing something bad and wants to make sure no one's watching him, or as if he's trying to see if anyone will disapprove of what he's doing. But why he wants the fishing rods, I don't know. I don't know if these are like particularly valuable ones, or if he just simply, I don't know, maybe his broke recently and he wants to take them. But it's a little bit of foreshadowing that comes earlier to the fact that they're doing more innocuous things, not great, but innocuous things like taking a couple fishing rods out of someone's house someone who they just took into quarantine, and then it turns to them just straight up looting the corpses of people they've killed and helping themselves, dividing it among themselves and taking whatever they like, and also taking things out of people's abandoned cars as well. Again, makes them feel more like, I don't know, like Fallout Raiders or something, as opposed to the U.S. military. But that's not to say such things wouldn't or don't happen in war. Certainly, that and much worse occur. But around this part, they're in close proximity to it. There is a moment when they are taking a family away, and one of the soldiers grabs a little girl who mentions her doll. So he quickly runs her back to where it's at, leans forward, and speaking of the military, here comes a plane. I'm gonna have to pause this 1 second. I guess the Air Force wanted to get involved in this one. Anyway, he quickly hurries her back and sort of leans forward so she can grab it real quick before they load them up. So I like that little moment. It's very fast, and the army gets very few nice moments in this film, but I'm glad they're there, actually. It would have been way too easy, I think, to just make them cartoonishly evil, which is territory I think the remake kind of gets more into. But then again, I haven't watched that in quite a while, so maybe I'll make a separate one on that, and we'll maybe not necessarily compare and contrast, but I'll talk a little bit about it. This also around here too. I don't think I have the particular image because I just could not get a good shot of it, but there is a part where a guy is defending his home. It's actually the part where that recruit I was talking about gets killed. They gun the guy down and go into his house, and then they mention how the place is a loony bin, and that they say something about him in particular. I can't remember what the specific line was. But that got me thinking as well, like, how do they know that this person had the virus, was acting in a crazy fashion? you could just as well say that, okay, this guy sees that his neighbors are being taken away, and there's all these people in hazmat suits who are actively refusing to explain while they're there. They're carrying guns. They're trying to storm into his house to take him and his family. I don't necessarily blame that guy for taking up arms and shooting back. You can find a way to explain that behavior, and it's not that he's crazy. I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. I don't know that's necessarily the course of action that I would take in that situation, but I can understand why the guy does what he does. My thingy got all messed up here. 1 second. There we go. Yeah, this particular image here also gets me thinking of the army as, again, occupying force and as ghosts. I think the mist, or I guess humidity maybe, that we see here, this is in the early morning after they've taken most of the town or killed the rest, and it truly has become a ghost town. I wish I could read what some of these signs say. I love doing that when I'm like playing video games or watching films where I need to look at every little thing and read what all the little advertisements or signs for businesses say, because you can often find some pretty funny and interesting stuff, especially when you didn't expect that anyone was going to be able to stop and really see. So people just kind of write whatever dumb thing they think of, or some kind of like joke type thing. I gotta slow myself down. I'm starting to say like and a lot more. I do that when I get too worked up. We have here one of the more powerful images in the film, in my opinion. I love how this guy has the word United over his head. This from I presume, from what we can see, is the United States Post Office, looming overhead as he is holding his rifle. And this comes at about the same point as that previous image where the town is completely deserted except for them. Of course, now I may be over analyzing it. I assume there's some reason why they chose to put this guy at this angle with that word above him, but also he's got the word post next to him too. So I don't know what would we make of that this is indicative of the post United States, perhaps. I don't know. Sometimes you can read too much into things, but I gotta assume that the way this is angled, that has to be deliberate. But even if not, it's a strong image to me. I do like that we can, and only probably because I actually stopped this, but rarely, well, maybe not rarely, but a lot of the time you can't see the eyes of these people, which I think actually makes them much more threatening, but also helps to show why later in the film they can easily be fooled and not recognize each other, and that they don't know each other, because we're all kind of hurried here, and given these outfits, you don't really know if the man you're talking to is actually a soldier or if it's an affected person or anyone else who killed them and took their hazmat, as we'll see later. Now we're back on this gentleman. I love the way the flag here is not only torn but also tangled up in the plant, what I think is a tree. I like as well. I didn't even notice this until I actually started putting this together, but there's someone in the window in the far right corner. I don't know if this building is supposed to be the high school, so perhaps if it is, that is one of the infected trying to escape, in which case this guy is doing a terrible job of doing guard duty, considering he's sitting down just kind of chilling as one of the infected is about to climb out the window. But it also may very well just be someone who got into the shot that wasn't supposed to be there. I'm not entirely sure. You can't see them too well, so and I'd have to, maybe if I went back and watched the clip some more, I would, there'd be a better indicator, but I don't think so. I think when putting this together, I did maybe check actually. Well, whatever the case, I'm throwing it into the story and saying it's intentional, but who knows? Maybe it's just some random person that wasn't supposed to be there. That kind of thing does happen quite a bit. in filmmaking. Here we're going back to the scene in which the bodies were being looted. This person who is unfortunately on fire he sort of starts swinging his gun around, but interestingly, he doesn't have a gas mask. So it leaves me to wonder, is this guy actually one of the soldiers, or was it someone who killed one of them or just managed to get their hands on a hazmat suit? But I do like that regardless, this is the first major point where the soldiers realize that they are not, I guess, infallible, that they are vulnerable and can just as easily catch this, well, maybe not quite as easily, but they can catch this disease just like the townspeople that they've been killing and robbing and herding into the high school, the people that they have acted so callously towards and talked down to. And I think in a way it sort of parallels, or at least gets me thinking about how the veteran characters in this film don't get any special treatment, in that even though they have just served their country in war, the military does not treat them any more kindly, and they are all othered by the military. It is just the army and everyone else, essentially. It's kind of like that thin blue line mentality, I guess, but with the military instead, which is a mentality I don't entirely blame them for having in this scenario, especially when, you know, the survival of the rest of the country and of their own survival is at stake. But it does get me thinking too at this moment how, once again, they could have very easily, I feel like, subdued this guy, and that he's not even trying to shoot them. He's just swinging the gun around, and there's a lot of them here, but one of the guys with a flamethrower just torches him anyway. It shows that once you are infected, you're not part of their group anymore. You're going with the others, and they will do whatever they damn well please to you. I didn't show the burning here, but there is a priest character. This is one of the army officers. I don't know if we ever get his name, but the two most important ones that are actively in the town, like trying to keep things under control, are Major Ryder and Colonel Peckham. This guy, there's a priest character who shows up in a couple scenes where he's at odds with the army because they are sort of trampling on his religion. They also don't, again, respect people's rights. So when he is trying to give people in his congregation shelter or is trying to do his duties, the army is interfering. So eventually he decides to, what I think is in a form of protest, although you could say that he is showing symptoms of the disease and the disease made him do this, but he self-immolates, which, given the time period, it's definitely supposed to be in reference to the act of protesting in that way. But again, it's kind of hard to tell who is infected and who isn't, regardless of whether they are a person in the town or of the town or in the army. But there is an interesting little bit where briefly we see that even though he is on fire, the priest seems to be sitting in the grass, burning, like silently. He is just sitting up, which makes me think that, okay, perhaps he was actually infected. I don't know if that affects one's ability to feel the pain of fire, but what really stands out to me too is how the officer here chooses to shoot him anyway, even though he is almost certainly going to die, and the priest is not doing anything. It's not like he's trying to catch others on fire or that he's running around. He's just sitting there. But I guess this could be representative of the military cracking down on protest, but it also shows that these people don't even have the right to die of their own accord. They must either be crammed into the high school where they will inevitably become infected, or the army must kill them. So before this guy can die of his own volition, this soldier decides to gun him down in front of a bunch of people as well. I guess just another act of callousness on their part. Then next we have this interesting bit of imagery in that. I say that because I guess I don't actually know. To me, it looks like this guy killed a bald eagle. There's a scene kind of far in the film where these two soldiers are dicking around while our main group of characters, who I will get into the characters more, don't you worry, but our main group of characters are watching them, and I think it's supposed to be a bald eagle, but it happens so quickly, as many things do in this film, you can't really tell. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's what it was supposed to be, given that we also get the imagery of the torn flag, that a bunch of toy soldiers get trampled over, that we have that bit where we see the United States just a little bit above the man in this menacing attire holding his rifle, occupying the town. There's all sorts of images like that throughout this film, including one, it'll be the last that we cover in this, that really gets me every single time. Here, again, I think that the blood really works with this choice of outfit for these characters. It's around this point in the film, and that's why I chose this particular shot, where, unless I'm misremembering, you start to... I guess let's say that for me, the process is that when I watch this film, at first the army is so hateable that I'm rooting for the townspeople, sometimes even honestly, perhaps the infected, or at least I feel good or feel fine with the fact when one of these soldiers end up getting wounded or killed. But then it soon turns to a more ambiguous sense of, oh, I don't know if I want the soldiers to prevail or if I want the townspeople or whoever to... both sides seem so horrible in this situation. It's such a messed up situation that you don't know, because on one hand, the army is trying to keep this contained, and this virus is certainly a major threat. Although I suppose life would continue anyway. I mean, it doesn't seem that they kill each other, and they all just act very odd, but I don't know. I guess humanity would eventually die out, even if it didn't kill itself. But as we see, the army fails anyway, despite their best efforts, despite all the blood and death that occurs in this film. So you do wonder what the point of it all is. And upon rewatching, I guess maybe at least I don't empathize with them quite as much. But then again, well, I guess, I don't know. Is it so bad if humanity did die off? I mean, it would not be ideal, but there was a world, a universe before us, and there will certainly be one after us in some capacity, I would think, unless we literally live until the universe just ceases to be. But I don't know. I do get conflicted. And then I even start to feel bad for some of the soldiers later because, well, Clank does a bit of war crimes, let's say. We'll talk more about it. But yeah, my feelings on them change throughout the film, where at first I'm like, yeah, like, kick their asses, fight back. And then I'm like, oh no, I don't know who really I want to prevail in this situation. And then it's like, oh, I actually kind of feel a little bad for these soldiers. But so, and I like that the film can kind of make me feel that way and push me back and forth. Because, you know, it is a very complicated situation. It's not all black and white like this guy's hazmat suit. Now we are going to get into the character section of this. We are pretty far in, not a whole lot more to go. But I'm mostly going to be talking about Clank, who is on the left, although David I will be talking somewhat about. He is the protagonist. Both were veterans, or are veterans, I should say. They both served in the military. But David was the Green Beret I mentioned before. They are called to a fire. which is the same fire that is set in the opening. I think it's like 2 minutes. It happens very quickly, where one of the infected starts destroying the house, and he's murdered his wife. He sets the whole thing ablaze. His two kids will later end up dying as a result of their injuries. But there's a moment that stuck with me where the fire chief, I think he's the fire chief anyway, instructs all of the fighter fighters, including David and Clank, to set a perimeter and just let it all burn itself out. But David mentions that parts of the house or perhaps the larger property can still be saved, and the fire chief just kind of brushes it off, much to the dismay of David and Clank, who ultimately follow the chief's orders, but are reluctant to do so, which I think is clearly meant to be representative of the army and their orders, how the higher ups want to simply set a perimeter and let this disease burn itself out, regardless of whether that means all of the townspeople will meet a grim fate. And so, and that as well is representative of how some of the army characters, and even your typical soldier, don't necessarily want to follow these orders. They may think differently, but ultimately they do just follow orders, as one sergeant puts it late in the film as David is interrogating him. Here we see, I thought I should at least show you clearly who Kathy on the left is. The man in the back is a Vietnam vet who is already infected, but he is not long for this world. As I mentioned before, they do not get any sort of special treatment or quarter from the military. He is promptly gunned down. Although I think, if I remember correctly, they do try to subdue him by other means at first. But so we're not at the point in the film where they just outright, slaughter anyone they come across. Then on the far right is Kathy's dad. I don't have much to say about him. I don't even remember his name, and I'm not sure it even got mentioned. But there's a really disgusting part of the film involving him that I'm not going to talk about, but he will come up again. Here, this particular moment stuck with me, where, we're back early in the film, where Clank is speaking to David. You can't see David in this shot. He mentions how David is late, that he was the first one at the fire station, which really didn't stick out with me the first time around, but when I rewatched this film, it got me thinking about how the disease can, like what I was talking about earlier, put certain parts of people's personalities or even their insecurities at the forefront. It can overplay certain parts of themselves, because this line ends up, I think, being a bit of foreshadowing, or at least indicative of what's going on inside Clank, because even though he plays it off like a joke, we see that he is rather fixated on the fact that him and David were both in the military, but David became a Green Beret, whereas I think Clank even says he didn't even come close, or at the very least, he didn't make it. And David mentions at one point how Judy, the woman on the left there, he thought that she would have ended up with Clank, but instead David got the girl. So as Clank becomes more symptomatic, we start to see these things sort of manifest in his behavior, the things he says as well. I wish I had more to say about Judy's character. I'll have a little bit towards the end of this, but frankly, it's kind of disappointing. But she was more active in the first 15 to 20 minutes of this film. Then again, much later to a small extent. But for the most part, she's just kind of there. She has some interactions with David, but she doesn't actually do much, which is rather unfortunate. The same goes for Kathy as well, where she she certainly serves more of a purpose, I think, but Kathy doesn't really do much in this film either. Then the only other female, like beyond just the sort of, I guess, background characters, there is one that works with Dr. Watts, who is one of the developers of the Trixie virus. She's helping him out somewhat, but yeah, she doesn't get too much screen time. I guess for the time she's there, she's a more active character. But yeah, she doesn't get too much attention. So I guess that is kind of unfortunate. But that's not to say that it's just the female characters that aren't particularly active, because like Kathy's dad is just kind of there for the most part. And when he is a more active character, unfortunately, he does some pretty sickening stuff. But I guess, yeah, that is one disappointment, because Judy actually does seem like a pretty interesting character, and you certainly feel for her later. I just wish she was able to do more. But then again, there are a lot of characters in this film, several of whom I'm not going to talk much about, simply because this will be even longer than it already is by far. As I was talking about previously, with Clank's insecurities regarding the military, this part comes where they are being pursued by a helicopter, as well as some soldiers on foot, through a forest. They both try to shoot the helicopter down, but it's pretty clear that David is the one to take it out with his last several shots that he takes. But then there's this very bizarre moment where, after the helicopter goes down and explodes, Clank runs up to him. He's all happy and seems like he's even kind of boasting about taking down the helicopter. And Clank just seems like he's under the impression that he was the one who did it. He then tells David something along the lines of, "Didn't I tell you?" or "I told you so," something of that sort. Whereas David just reminds him, "Hey, I think you're forgetting about the infantry," and then he walks off. Clank just kind of stands there looking a bit confused before he follows along, which I think is all indicative of how Clank feels inferior to David, particularly with regard to their military service. I think he also wants to, if not to surpass him, then to at least be on equal footing. So he's very excited when under this delusion that he was the one that took out the helicopter, but it was actually David who did it, and I suppose stole his thunder. But I think this may, at least to my understanding, this may be the earliest point where we start to see Clank developing symptoms. Because I look back and I just cannot, for the life of me, figure out what he would be talking about when he was telling David, like, "I told you so," or whatever. So I think he was just completely delusional here. Or I don't know. Maybe he's not trying to take all the credit for shooting the helicopter down. But given how he acts later, it would certainly fit. I decided to throw this kind of in the middle of talking about these characters, but here is Dr. Watts, who mentions he's explaining to Colonel Peckham and Major Ryder how you can't really tell that there is the difference between who is infected and who isn't. In the middle of his criticism of how crazy and all over the place the whole operation is, which becomes extra haunting later in the film when you realize that, these soldiers truly do not know who is even one of them and whether or not they are infected, because this thing does have a bit of an incubation period as well. So for all they know, they could all three be infected at the very moment this scene takes place, and could very well, any of them could theoretically carry it out of there if it's not already, which I guess at some point it does end up escaping. So, and it's no surprise why, because later I didn't include it, but there's a shot kind of near the end, a few actually, of the soldiers sort of standing and sitting around along the perimeter, And this comes... Actually, you know what? I'll wait till we get there to explain. So that way we're not, going so far in the abstract. But I think I threw in the bit with Dr. Watts there just since we're talking about Clank's descent into this illness. There comes a part that I found some dark humor in this, but there is a point where a few, I think 5 soldiers are stationed at a house. The group wants to take it over, so they have shelter, and they also want to interrogate the soldiers to figure out exactly what all is going on. Which, granted, many of the soldiers have little to no idea about this virus whatsoever. So they are just as much in the dark or thereabout as the townsfolk are. In fact, there were some things even the colonel and major did not know that Dr. Watts had to explain to them. Which, it's interesting to me too, how no one knows all of the vital information in this film. That everyone only knows so much. But if they worked together, they could have probably solved this whole thing and even developed a cure, most likely. There certainly would have been a lot less death. But because everyone is at odds with each other, which largely has to do how the army kind of stormed in and started sowing chaos out of nowhere, or the fact that it took 5 or 6 days for there to even be a response to the virus leaking into the water supply after it crashed or whatever. I forget how exactly it got loose, how it ended up in the area, but just due to some mishandling on the military's part. So again, though, it shows that how crucial communication is in these times of crisis, but how it so easily falls apart. And I like too that the first response, and really all the decisions that are made in this film, come so late, because that's really how it works in real life. You can look back at the history of various diseases. We tend to be unable to make decisions, especially at a governmental level, fast enough or faster than the disease can spread or create other bits of chaos, that are related to its existence. But, I completely derailed this, but the reason I took this image in particular is because there's a funny part where, sorry if you hear background noise, I have several roomies, or well, 2 roomies. I don't know why I said several, but I guess because I was counting the animals. Anyway, David tells Clank, don't get trigger happy, because Clank is becoming a little bit unhinged at this point. So Clank kind of freezes. His eyes are going all over the place. He looks very confused. And then he takes out his knife, which he then uses to stab the 2 soldiers outside, including one that David had grabbed and was trying to interrogate. Just completely out of nowhere, Clank looks over and just runs in and stabs him, which is a really messed up moment, but I couldn't help but find the humor in that. David told him, don't be trigger happy, so then Clank interpreted that as be stab happy. Now, when they actually go inside, where there are 3 other soldiers, this is where Clank truly becomes unhinged. As you can see, David is interrogating the sergeant. There are 2 other soldiers Clank is holding up. One of them goes for a gun, which, okay, fine, I can understand shooting him. But then the other guy is just standing there and yells, no. Then Clank proceeds to blast him. The sergeant, fearing for his life, tries to run, and Clank shoots him in the back. Which, then, as if that weren't all bad enough, there is, I love this particular shot. It's kind of goofy looking, but in the moment it's very menacing, because David is clearly distraught over what occurred. He knows that Clank definitely has the illness and is becoming more uncontrollable, more violent. But meanwhile, Clank is just boasting. He starts yelling about how he got 5 of those bastards, or whatever he says, 5 of those sons of bitches, and is just completely bragging about the war crime he just committed. Whereas, and it kind of even insults David and telling him that, he's not such a great soldier after all or whatever. David just kind of walks away, but then Clank gives him that little smirk as he's watching him. I also love that there's not a whole lot of red in this film, apart from when people are bleeding. So I like that the little like backsplash there for the kitchen, as well as the flowers, have this strong red to them, given the massacre that will occur in this, or that does occur in this room. Then everything with Clank gets so tense from this point forward. Well, I guess I shouldn't say everything, but a lot of the moments that they have, because you're just waiting for him, especially at one point where they're all sitting at that kitchen table. You're just waiting for Clank to pop off because he just keeps talking so much crap, and he's clearly willing to, gun people down even when they are unarmed or not doing anything. So you're just waiting for the moment he finally pops off. Then a little bit later, we see that he has pretty obviously killed Kathy's dad. He's hanging in like the doorway to the basement. Then there's one of those classic shots where David moves out of the frame, and then you see it's revealed, oh, Clank is standing behind him and watching. It's interesting how, well, I guess as if it weren't already obvious, when David cuts Kathy's dad down, he falls down the steps onto the pile of bodies of like the soldiers Clank had killed. And then Clank, of course, is saying, like, it wasn't me, I didn't do it, before anyone even said anything. Which, honestly, he may not really know or understand that he did it. He could just be trying to cover his own tracks, but given that he has this disease, it's entirely possible that he genuinely doesn't think he did it, which is, honestly, to me, even more terrifying and sad. There's even a part where a little bit before this where he seems kind of upset and asks David if he did something wrong. He feels confused. And this is sort of getting into the point where he fully realizes, unlike I think many people, where he is coming down with this illness, which I guess is sort of parallels real life, at least with schizophrenia, in that a lot of people don't always have insight into their illness. I am grateful in that I very often do. I don't really have delusions, but I know that people can kind of come in and out of it where they get the sense perhaps that they were acting weird or just didn't do something right or made some kind of mistake, but then they're not really, they sort of are like drifting, maybe coming out of psychosis a little bit, but then drift further back in. And it can be really hard to get out of psychosis. But that doesn't always manifest in the forms of delusions either. I mean, I have persistent psychotic symptoms, but it doesn't mean I'm delusional or not aware of what's going on. But I do really feel for people who experience that lack of awareness, and it can be very, very disorienting to coming in and out of that. Now, I was going to include a part where Clank, is this part where Clank kind of makes his last stand, kills a bunch of soldiers to cover David and Judy so they can escape. But I figured we'd kind of covered Clank enough, although there is a kind of funny part that further demonstrates how, at all levels, the army is incompetent, where he's killed all these soldiers and there's one left. It's actually the one that, it remains standing for a little while after being shot. Clank runs out of ammo, and the soldier is like taunting him, and takes his time walking over to him. He's going to essentially execute him, but then Clank quickly pulls out a pistol he had been hiding and starts shooting, which, usually they cover that in army training, where you should be mindful of the fact that someone might have a sidearm, and not just completely let your guard down and start belittling your enemy before they've even been subdued. Anyway, going on to the subject of this particular shot, we're almost to the end here. We've only got a few left, thankfully, because this is going really long. No one's gonna watch this crap. But she gets more of a close-up right after this, but this was the point where I could fully tell that Judy had the virus, because there's some parts where I kind of question it. that's one thing I love about this film, where it can be rather subtle when it wants to be. And the nature of this virus, especially since there are so many characters, you don't get to linger on some of them for too long. You do wonder, is this in line with their character, with the sort of person they are, or are they starting to show symptoms? But when I saw her staring up at David like this as he is scouting the area with his binoculars, she that was indicative to me that there was something deeply wrong, because she stays that way for a while, and then immediately thereafter when he's talking to her, you can just kind of see in her eyes the way she's smiling and how she's talking that she has contracted it, which I really feel bad for her in this moment. It's got to be a terrifying experience, becoming someone you're not, even if she's not fully aware of it, like as Clank was becoming aware of it. I do feel for her regardless, and I feel for David in that he has lost his hometown, he's lost his best friend, he's going to, even if she doesn't die, which she does end up dying, he's essentially lost the person he loved as well, because she has become someone else. There may never be a cure either. Which it does make me wonder if it is meant to parallel dementia somewhat as well. That was the other thing I was thinking before. I kind of blanked on it. But I think the Trixie virus is more meant to parallel several different things. I don't know if there was a specific illness in mind. Maybe there's somewhere you can read about that, or there's an interview you can watch. But to my knowledge, it wasn't, or it doesn't directly parallel a specific thing. But I mean, even schizophrenia can certainly change you a lot, even if you don't experience the more delusional or paranoid sides of it. Which I get some of that paranoia, which I like this. The paranoia in this film kind of stokes me in just the right way. Not saying it like triggers my symptoms or anything like that. I just mean that I don't know. I can feel at home in more paranoid films, kind of like The Thing. Although some things like the Mandela Catalog can get me feeling pretty paranoid. I shouldn't watch that kind of stuff, but I still do anyway. I love horror. What can I say? But yeah, even with schizophrenia, I mean, say they had a cure tomorrow, even if they were to completely fix what's wrong with me, I would still be changed in that I've experienced a lot over these years because of this illness. I don't think there's any going back to normal. Things can't go back to the way they were. That's just not possible. And I've had that sort of dilemma with some other diagnoses I have. One in particular that, while I am technically cleared of now, I think I am forever changed by. Okay, we're in the home stretch. There's only this image and two more. We can make it. So this here is something I've been getting at for a while. The soldier in the background there is David. He has killed one of them and taken his outfit. This other soldier is completely oblivious to the fact that this is not the comrade he was just walking around with a moment ago. It's kind of funny how easy it is to fool the guy as well. David, all he has to do is, when the guy is calling out, he puts the gas mask over his face, then responds to the guy a couple times. That's enough to convince this soldier that everything is good, that this is the same man he's been patrolling with. So it just shows how little even the military know each other, which I suppose is a consequence of the whole setup of this operation and how they are outfitted, which, makes sense why they'd have hazmats and gas masks, but still, it does come with its downsides. Although I do love how, crinkly and kind of, almost looks like they're wearing paper. These things are rather thin, too. There's a funny part where an old lady with a sewing needle stabs one of the soldiers to death, which I guess it shouldn't be too funny, someone being stabbed. It's kind of comical that it comes when she's, knitting. And this little needle she has is enough to completely overwhelm this guy who once again let his guard down. Then we have here. Actually, we're gonna go back. There's one more thing I want to say. Sorry, there's something else I want to mention here. Shortly hereafter, Judy is shot and killed by a few of the townspeople who seem to have come down with the illness. And even though David removes some of the army gear and starts yelling at them like, "Hey, we're not army," they keep attacking, which surprises him because, and I had not even noticed this until it was in my face in this film, but his group never encountered infected who were hostile to regular people. They had only ever seen people who were aggressive towards the army, which even includes Clank, because oh man, you're gonna hear so much banging, I think. Oh, good grief, I hate that every time I try to record. There's always so much noise. But anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah, so Clank, at least when there's a part where he attacks Kathy's dad, but he had a pretty good reason for doing that. So yeah, to David, he's not yet encountered people who were just hostile to other townspeople, So that was quite a striking moment to me. And then here, I wonder a lot about this particular moment. This is where Dr. Watts has supposedly found a cure, although it seems like maybe he might be coming down with the illness himself. So maybe he didn't necessarily find a cure, but either way, he made a lot of progress, as one army doctor notes. But the soldiers somehow, and who knows, maybe it's because they're starting to show symptoms, but they're leading everyone in the high school into a particular part of it. And as Dr. Watts is trying to leave to get the information about the cure over to Colonel Peckham, they are trying to force him into here, and they're not listening to him. They don't seem to even know that he is working with them, even though he has been here pretty much the whole time and has not necessarily in the high school, but still has been working with the military just about this whole time. So again, just a major, I guess, breakdown in communication. That's another bit of evidence on that front, that there is just such terrible communication, and that things could have turned out so much better had the people cooperated more. But then, understandably, there was a lot of things that got in the way of that. But it is pretty baffling how they didn't know, and when he tries to escape, he ends up getting killed in the commotion. Ironically, the army trying to stop him leads to the rest of the infected panicking, so the whole place just gets completely overwhelmed, which I think probably might be part of the reason why this movie got kind of poorly received, and I think still is to some extent today. A lot of people don't like the ending. But speaking of which, and I don't know if I mentioned it, but Dr. Watts just does end up dying, and the cure, sample things he had, get destroyed, so they are completely doomed. But in this final image that I have for you, Colonel Peckham has received his orders to be dispatched to, I forget what town they say, but there's another town where the disease has popped up, so he needs to go there, and essentially history is going to repeat itself. You can see the disappointment on his face, and wondering, I think, if he is going to die, wondering how much more of this he can really take, if things will ever change. But it seems as if the government and the military are doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. I love, and this gets me every time, on the right there, that hood and gas mask on the hat rack. Every single time I think it is a head on a pike, I always have to do a double take or even a triple take. I even sometimes feel like I see the eyes or part of someone's face in the mask. I can tell better here that there isn't, but it does get me every single time. And I'm sure the idea is supposed to be that it is a head on a pike, representative of all of the soldiers who have died essentially for nothing in this film. whose lives were wasted, and perhaps even indicative of the fact that this next one is going to be Colonel Peckham's last mission. You know, that he is not along for this world either, and perhaps it will be his head on a pike. But um, yeah, it is a rather bleak ending, but I think given everything that happens in this film, it's understandable that it ends the way it does. And hey, they still haven't found a cure for schizophrenia yet. So honestly, I guess the film wasn't too far off. It it is a very dark, disturbing, upsetting movie. It's got its humor for sure, but I really like it actually. I know some people might not necessarily like how the infected are depicted, you know, but I don't really. I think this movie has a lot to say, and I don't think it encourages people to be, you know, psychophobic or whatever, or demonizes a particular sort of illness. I think it's just more it's showing, it's kind of like holding up a mirror to us, I guess, and showing what what it what the sort of things people, I guess, harbor inside themselves, and just what we are capable of doing, even to, you know, citizens of our own country, or the kinds of things that will happen in this, or could happen in this sort of crisis. I And it's certainly critical of aspects of um, the Vietnam War, of the government, and of the military. I mean, even seems like even maybe the president is infected, or at least if not infected, he is a very odd and frankly callous individual. In that, when the brass, or the at least these higher ups, are trying to explain things to him on this like video feed, the president is facing away from the camera in his chair, just, you know, lazily smoking a cigar or a cigarette, and talks in this sort of menacing way. He almost seems like a supervillain to me. And the higher ups seem rather unnerved by this as well. So I can't really tell, yeah, if it's supposed to be that the president is infected or not. But if he is, man, that's greatly disturbing, knowing that they are. That would certainly explain why everything is so, as Dr. Watts put it, shoddy. Like, why everything is so chaotic and haphazard. If it turns out that someone with the virus is actually pulling the strings, you know. But who knows? Or maybe it's just meant to show that, you know, it's no wonder that they can commit so many atrocities when the person in the highest position is so uncaring, unbothered by everything. So, anyway, this has gone on for almost an hour and 13 minutes. I think I have rambled long enough. So, hopefully, I apologize if the mic quality is poo poo. My studio mic broke. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I'm getting a replacement. So if I do more of these, hopefully it will sound better. All right. Well, I think I've covered pretty much everything I want to cover. I think I did have more to say, but honestly, I forget. That's what happens when you do things off the dome. My throat is killing me. Goodbye.